in HR, we deal with people that have to go on a leave because their parents in poor health and dying. I can't fix that situation, but I can say we're gonna make this leave easy for you, and I can be a shoulder to cry on. And that's sometimes the most important thing, and realizing that has been very freeing because it allows me, like, "Oh, if my role is to be present, I can do that." Whereas, like, the old version of me would like, "You have to fix this, you have to take their tears away."
Welcome to Adapt or Die, real stories behind leaders' biggest pivots. My name is Andreas Pedersen, and I'm a former tech CEO that today are helping other leaders realize their true potential. You are hearing the Power Without Permission miniseries. We have the same three acts breakdown, new raw stories designed to move you from challenge to action. Today's guest is Stephanie Hammerwold. She is the head of HR at the Skirball Culture Central in Los Angeles. Welcome so much to the show,
Thank
Stephanie.
you. I wanna point out, training for my first marathon. Like, this
Oh,
is really
okay.
a crazy thing, so, yeah.
I think I mean, it's impressive. I will be on the sidelines maybe cheering you on. But let's dive back into those years or that time where you're in that moment just 5 minutes before you just had enough or something was going on in your life. How did your life look like? You were pouring into work, you were pouring into everyone else, and sort of without the limits. What was going through your head at the time?
I think that was kind of as we were coming out of the COVID isolation, and that was back when you and I were working together at Hercules, and I described it to a friend as being tethered to my computer because everything I did was virtual. Whether it was volunteer work or my day job, and it was constant demands that way, and because we weren't in an office space or anything like that, I really felt like I was just carrying that, like, Slack and email and all the kinda noise from that around with me as a constant, and, my home was my office, so it was always there, and sometimes I just sat in that chair staring at that screen for a long time, and that really cemented to me that that job was taking up hours and hours of my life. That, it was like, wake up, go tie myself to my computer, sit there all day, push the buttons in the right order, jump on calls, and eat and go to bed.
And on top of that, you got a bunch of phone calls from everyone in the company. I remember
Mhm,
that asking you to do this, fix
mhm,
that. And everyone was a little extra, how do I say, extra privileged during COVID
mhm.
times. And you had to play almost customer support or HR extra customer support. Um, when were you like, okay, this is having like a massive impact on me? Did you have any physical manifestation or physical things that started happening?
Yeah.
Was it purely
I think
mindset?
it was early, I think 2022, those years all blur together, so remembering the exact year, it's hard, but it was early in that year, and I decided to go on a long road trip, and it was instead of just taking the time off, I took a couple days off, stopped in one place, did vacation, and then moved to another location and worked from there, and so it was a mix of some days I worked remote, some days I took a day off, and it was a 2-week long road trip, essentially, and I love going on road trips, so those first couple years of the pandemic, I felt grounded, and so I did this and I visited some friends, I ended up in Reno with a friend and just had this, like, breakdown sitting in his car, and at first he thought, like, I was sad that I was gonna be going home in a couple days, and I was like, "No, that's not it." It was the realization that it was time for me to move on. I realized that job wasn't fulfilling me anymore, and I also knew I wanted to leave that job on a high note before I got to the point where I resented it. And you and I have both worked with people that overstayed that point, and it was a very negative departure. And I knew, like, people like you and a lot of other people that we worked with, like, I didn't want to burn those bridges. And so I knew to maintain those relationships and to really for my own mental health, I needed to find something that like slowed things down a little bit. It's kinda funny, I went from, like, rapid growth tech startup to arts nonprofit that move at completely different speeds. And it was a little bit of an adjustment, I have to say, like, slowing down, and my boss in those first few weeks had to remind me, like, "You have a long list, you don't have to do this all in your first few months." But that was, like, a real wake-up call for me to make that decision because my history has been overstaying things long beyond the point where I should have left. And this really felt like one of the first times in my life where I just said, "You know what? This is the right decision. This is what I need to do now for me." And I changed my settings on LinkedIn, and within a week, a recruiter reached out and had this and said I had this opportunity at the Skirball. Like, I was just gonna do a passive search, and suddenly, when I made that decision, the opportunity fell in my lap.
So even though you were working for the company that I was
Uh-huh.
CEO for, I think the way you handled that,
Mhm.
Stephanie, and how you set the boundary on like now I need like all this is just it is not
Mhm.
okay anymore. And the way you communicated to me, all the other executives, all of us were sort of cheering
Mhm.
you on. And I mean, we're still friends today. We still talk. You're part of this book. You're co-author of Power Without Permission. And the reason is that you handle it in such a beautiful
Mhm.
way. And
Mhm.
I also think and I mean, we were friends during the
Yeah.
pandemic, or we are friends. During the pandemic, we lived literally I don't know how many hours we spend working out of my
Yeah.
backyard. But what do you think, Stephanie, you absolutely learn to say no. You learn to sort of listen to yourself and not just be there for everyone
Mhm.
else and not just have a servant leadership mindset, but to turn it off and on. What was sort of that what where did you draw that strength from? And when did you realize that the path you were heading down was just not okay?
I think one thing that ended up being really healthy for me is finding that boundary with the prison work I was doing, because I'm supporting people inside, who are some of the most in need people out there. These are people in desperate situations, and it's easy to get sucked into all that, and sometimes they'll ask for money or things like that, and you have to say no. I volunteer through an organization, and we have very clear rules about what you can and can't do. So it was nice to fall back on that. But I also like that taught me this lesson of like there are really big limitations of what I can do. Somebody can complain about the conditions, and I can do advocacy work, but I cannot go in there and change it. And so there are very real walls and barbed wire that are actual boundaries that when I go do in-person visits, like, I see those boundaries. And doing that kind of deep emotional work with people made me realize, like, I can't do that work without setting those boundaries. So I kinda started having this moment, this wake-up call, like, I can apply that same thinking, in my day job. And especially these last 5 years, starting with the pandemic, here in LA, we dealt with the fires in January. My workplace, our campus was closed for almost a month. We were in the evacuation zone. Um, we were without power for a long time. And those are all big things that we have to take care of employees through. And so I had to set very clear boundaries in those things because employees are looking for answers from someone. So they're looking to leaders in their workplaces. It was funny in the early days of COVID. I remember, I would sit down with you and the other folks on the C-suite, and we were all looking at each other, and people were looking at me going, "Okay, you're HR, what should we do?" And I'm like, am I an expert at this? My degrees are in English and women's studies. My knowledge of handling public health and pandemics comes from Stephen King's novel The Stand, and that's what I'm drawing from is fiction. But we were all in that boat of like, this was not something we ever thought we'd have to deal with, and we dealt with some big challenges in those first few years at Hercules. Like any startup has, there's gonna be big things that happen, and there are gonna be challenges that surprise you, but I think that one was something that none of us ever thought we'd deal with in our professional careers. And, like, how do we handle a global public health emergency?
I remember all those
Yeah,
conversations, and we were all like, I don't
yeah.
know.
You're like, "Is
Like,
there an
what do
adult
we do
here,
here?"
adult in the room? Like, is somebody gonna be the grown up and make this decision?" Um, and, an employee recently posed this question in the employee council we have here at the Skirball of, like, where does an employer's responsibility start and end when it comes to looking after an employee's wellness?
Mhm.
And that's been a question that has really, really stuck with me, and I don't know the answer yet, because people are looking to us. When leaders that are running this country are presenting the space of uncertainty, they're looking to us, and that becomes really hard. So we have to set healthy boundaries. We have to be realistic about what we can and can't do. Sometimes I think that's where it's important to show transparency and vulnerability, and sometimes to say, like, "Hey, yes, this is scary, and it's okay to feel scared right now."
I love that. It's it's sometimes people they almost push away the emotion for way too long instead of just embracing it. It's okay to be scared. I love that. But tell me, Steph, I think that you went from a transition from almost having that impossible standard of HR is supposed to fix
Mhm,
everything to realizing like that's not the
mhm.
case. How do you show up today? And what if you have some of the listeners out there, like what are the warning signs that you're kind of burning out for everyone else but yourself?
I have these codependency tendencies. Like, long ago, my therapist said, "Google the word codependent and see what you think about that," and it was kind of a jarring thing. And that's really, like, a big part of that is where you form your identity in terms of how you take care of someone else. And it's like it's good to take care of other people, it's good to help other people out, but when you do that where it becomes your identity, it's unhealthy. And, I've done a lot of that work to undo those habits and to realize, like, sometimes I had this conversation today with a manager. I said, "Sometimes we have to give employees the space to process and feel upset. Sometimes as leaders, we have to deliver bad news." And there's 2 things that happen. Number 1, we often have had a lot more time to process that because we've been working on it behind the scenes, so by the time we deliver that news to employees, we have processed it and we feel comfortable with it. Those employees are hearing it for the first time, and so we need to allow them that same space that we had, and I think our tendency is to step in and go, "I'm gonna fix this so I'm gonna make you happy right away." But part of being human is feeling that range of emotions, and so I realized, like, it's healthier for me, it's healthier for that employee. And that goes for if as a company you have to do layoffs or you have to do a closure or, you're facing a major crisis. Like, people need to have that space to process. We're too quick to jump in and think we have to fix it. And sometimes there are things we fix. Like, there's tons of minor issues that come into my office that I'm like, "I can fix that right away." Like somebody says, "Oh, the time clock doesn't work all the time and we need to get that fixed." Done. That's not something I need to let somebody process emotions about, but dealing with this big news or some major change, or you find out that a leader's leaving or something like that, like, give people that space, and that's where we're providing for people's wellness, not in thinking, like, "I always have to make this person happy," because 'cause you're gonna fail. If you enter into it, and I've found that out the hard way, like, if I enter into it thinking that it's my job to make sure employees are happy, I'm gonna fail because there's no way I can make people happy all the time.
I think this is so important to underline for the listeners and extrapolate from what you're saying within the mindset, just within HR. It's within
Mhm,
leadership, it's with any part of the organization, especially for people that are feel like they have imposter syndrome or they have to show up. Like you said, part of their identity is to is to help others. And I
mhm.
mean, it's not a healthy thing. What do you think if you were to tell the listeners, what will it cost them if they sort of like, yeah, that's maybe me, and they don't listen to their own gut feel? What's it gonna cost them uh, a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, if they don't make a
I mean,
change?
it's just exhaustion, it wears you down, it has an effect on your health and well-being. Um, a really good example for me is one of my best friends from college and I went on this Alaska cruise back in May, and we both committed to not checking our work email once, and we held to it. Like, she and I both we were just held each other accountable. We wanted to be present. We She lives in another state, so we don't get to see each other very often. We're also in this beautiful place in this once in a lifetime trip. And if I had been sitting there responding to work emails the whole time, I would have missed out on that. And nothing burned down. Everything was fine. I left my team well equipped. And I was also like, I left for that trip. I said, what am I going to solve from a boat off the coast of Alaska? And it was the first time since the invention of smartphones that I had a vacation like that, where I didn't think about work. And yeah, I came back and things were fine. And I blocked off a chunk of time my first day back to spend half a day getting caught up on all the email. Nothing fell apart. I mean, that's also like I equipped my team, I put the mechanisms in place so things would take care of itself. It makes me think of like how when we first were getting started with Hercules and it was August and all of our connections in Denmark were like, "Nice to meet you. Okay, I'm gonna be offline for a month because I'm going on holiday."
Yeah.
And like, just completely logged off, right? And that's, like, into the American brain, the fact that you're not accessible during that time is confusing. But I did it, and like, now I'm evangelizing to all my colleagues on the leadership team, like, when you go on vacation, you log off.
I agree. And the Scandinavian or the European culture is that you usually take 3 to 4 weeks
Mhm,
off and you're truly off. You even lock your phone in the office before you
mhm.
leave. There is no chance you're going to do something. If people want to reach you, it's probably by mail pigeons or something. I don't know. But so I think one of the concept I also want you to tell the listeners about because we talked about it multiple times, and I don't know if you remember, but it's below the line, above the line. Could you explain that concept a little bit and how you can use it as a tool to sort of regain control when people are trying to take too much of your energy?
Yeah, this came from a coach I worked with. She told me it was from the Oz Principle, and it's funny because at this leadership roundtable that I was at a couple days ago in Minneapolis, we actually talked about this. She
Perfect.
said, like, there's a lot of information in that book, but she said that's the only thing you need to really take away from it. And it's this idea that when somebody comes to your office and starts complaining about things and is negative and is just venting, that's below the line thinking. You allow them to be below the line for a little while, but you place a limit. You say, I'm gonna just let you complain for 5 minutes, but then I'm gonna take you above the line and we're gonna be solution oriented. And I've done this quite a few times with employees. Now, I've also had times in the past year where I've failed at it, and I let an employee go on, and I've realized, like, this person's been talking at me for an hour, and I always kinda do a debrief with myself and say, "What could I have done better?" And I think, like, 10 minutes in, I could have said, "Hey, this meeting isn't productive. Let's end it right here." And I've done that a couple times, and it's been so effective, and it's kept me from having that moment of, like, "Oh my gosh, I sat there for an hour and had this employee just drain my energy." Um, Now sometimes somebody enters in that way and I say, "Okay, it's my job to help you find a solution. Let's talk about this together." And you have a really productive conversation. It also makes the employee feel more empowered to solve their problem, and it takes that burden off of the leader's shoulders to feel like they have to solve it. What you're doing is bringing that employee to a space saying, "Let's find solutions together," rather than, "I'm gonna be your savior." Like, I had to get out of that mindset of the savior complex, like, "I'm gonna save everybody and I'm gonna make everybody happy."
As I personally love this
Mhm,
tool, and because you're basically saying, "I will hear you
mhm,
out, like, but I will put a timer on it because otherwise you will not find the solution you're
mhm.
looking for, and you're gonna leave." What ends up happening if you're just sitting there and listening, you're basically validating that it's okay to not try to find the
Yeah.
solution. And there will be times you and I had a little code word when we worked together. We said, "Hey, can I just vent? Like, I don't
Uh-huh.
want the solution. Let me just
Yeah.
vent and get it off my chest. Like, I just need a pair of ears. Like, can you offer like?" And it works. That's another way of saying it. But I think an individual that have the awareness coming to a leader or to a friend or family or whatever it is, the awareness of what you
Mhm.
need and how to set the boundary for yourself. And then the opposite party set the boundary for the individual if they can't set it themselves.
Yeah. And yeah, I really think about that a lot of also just giving people the tools to solve problems in healthy ways. And I use this with my friends too sometimes. I say, "Do you want me to just listen and let you vent, or do you want me to help you find a solution?" Because sometimes people just need, and especially with my close friends, like, they just need the space to go, "Oh my god, you won't believe what happened." And I don't wanna offer unsolicited advice, so I'll allow the space, and, like, one of my really good friends, Katie, has taught me that thing of, like, when you reach out to someone saying, "Hey, I have an issue I need to work out. Do you have time?" And she and I have set that boundary with each other in a way that if I reach out and say that and she says no, I don't get upset because I know she's setting a healthy boundary for herself, and then chances are we're gonna follow up in a couple days. But it might be
So
that
good.
she and I, like, one of us is not in the mental space to hear that, and I love that we've built that into our friendship, and it's something then I also can take into the workplace.
So powerful, Steph. And I think these are nuggets. And I think these tools are so important to learning to set your boundary. What goes on in your mind when I say the following phrase? If I say no, I'm letting people down.
I mean, that used to be basically my motto. But now I think more, and it's become a cliche, but no is a complete sentence. Um, and also, like, if people are let down, like, so be it. I mean, Yeah, and I've had to do that a couple times lately, and it's been fine, and most of the time people move on. They might get a little grumpy in the moment, but people don't generally hold on to that. Like, I'm not one that holds on to grudges for a long time, and I forgive pretty quickly, and I find a lot of people that I'm close to are the same way. Some of these are friendships I've had for decades. Just because I say no one time, it's not gonna fall apart.
Do you ever relapse though? Do you ever catch yourself in the moment where you're like, "Ah, I'm letting this person down?"
Yeah, and I'll say, like, even those times recently where I've had employee meetings that have gone on way too long, and sometimes I walk out of those thinking, "Oh, I cut them off," or I think, "Oh, I can't cut them off, I'm gonna make them feel bad," and what I've been doing more and more, though, in those situations is checking in with myself and not beating myself up about it. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's only natural that sometimes, we can have emotional reactions, but I try to be realistic and kinda do self-therapy and talk it through thinking like, "What would my therapist say about this?" And that it's not my responsibility if that person's upset because I said no and set a healthy boundary. And so
That's another great
yeah,
tool, by the way, for the listeners here is what would person X
mhm,
say if I did this?
yeah. And I've worked with my therapist for a long time, so sometimes her line of thinking enters into my head.
For the listeners here, if you find this type of conversation inspiring, if you can identify here, please, the book is coming out on September 25th. You can go to leadersadapt.com/book, Power Without Permission. Stephanie's have a lot more things in her story, also about setting boundaries. Um, Tell me, do you have any sort of pre-meeting routine? Do you have like, let's say you're super stressed, Stephanie, and you know you're going to go into that meeting that might be dragging on. Like, how much for you today is proactive awareness versus reactive in the moment?
I think every time I head into a meeting that I know might be difficult like that, I just start by reminding myself, like, "You have the power to end this meeting if it's not going well." And often these meetings are happening in my office. I'm the head of HR here. And so I make my space very welcome. I have a pile of snacks over in the corner that like for employees to come in and get. And generally it's a positive place, but I have to remember like if somebody's coming in here and being disrespectful and not respecting my boundaries, like I can set a boundary and just say, I'm done. Um, and end it on my terms. Because it's just also realizing like sometimes nothing you're gonna do is gonna make an employee happy. At every job I've worked at, I've had some employee like that is dealing with their own issues or demons or whatever it is outside of work that are things far beyond what I can help with, and that's okay. I mean, it's hard, and again, that's like where I've learned these lessons from working with people in prison is the very real boundaries I have to set. And gosh, in the past few months, some of the people I'm dealing with inside, like, are going through some really big, big challenges. And, I mentioned this in the chapter I wrote. There's this book I read, The Amen Effect, that goes into this idea of sometimes the best thing you can do for someone else is just be present and not solve. And I had to do that recently when I had a legal call with one of my people inside who's currently in solitary and it's just really having a tough time. And I know I can't go and take her out of there. That's the prison's decision. But I can be present. I can show her that, I'm still here for her. I'm not going anywhere. And that's important. Like, she acknowledged that in the end. We had a really good call. It was a very emotional call. But at the same time, she just needed somebody to know that I'm still on her team no matter what has happened. Um, and there's a lot of employees like that. Like we at HR, we deal with people that have to go on a leave because their parents in poor health and dying. I can't fix that situation, but I can say we're gonna make this leave easy for you and I can be a shoulder to cry on. And that's sometimes the most important thing. And realizing that has been very freeing because it allows me like, oh, if my role is to be present, I can do that. Whereas, like, the old version of me would like, "You have to fix this, you have to take their tears away." But, like, if they're in that situation, like, I can't do that.
No, and I think setting unrealistic expectations on yourself, basically, it's a game of you're gonna lose every time. But so for the listeners here, obviously you have come a
Mhm.
long way and you have built these frameworks and the way how you operate today. And someone might be listening and like, oh wow, that's never gonna be me. What are the what are like 3 first
Mhm.
steps that you recommend to anyone listening if they wanna start setting clear boundaries and learning to say no?
I say number 1, I'm a huge advocate for therapy. Like, get if you and I came to therapy fairly late in life in my 30s, and yeah, going into it thinking like, "Oh, the problem is with everyone else, and I can't fix everybody else's behavior," and therapy quickly turned me around to thinking like, "No, I can't change everybody else's behavior, but I have control over my reaction." Um, and so that's, I think, a huge, huge thing. I think number 2 is just admitting, like, you can't save the day, you can't fix everything, and that's okay. Maybe that's, like, 2 or 3 in the same one. But I think also making time for yourself in the beginning, we talked about, training for my first marathon. I came to running very late in life. I'm turning 50 in October, and this is my midlife crisis. And I'm doing a half marathon in October just before my birthday. And when I'm out running, I cannot do anything else. I mean, I could listen to podcasts or music or whatever, but I can't be on my phone. I can't be responding to emails. I certainly can't be taking phone calls because it's going to be me out of breath trying to talk to someone. And I found like that it has been this space that I make for myself. And in a lot of ways, running is a purely selfish endeavor because I'm doing it just for myself. I'm not doing it for anyone else. And that has been this huge, huge lesson for me that, it's okay to make that space, and so I think finding whatever it is that is your way to disconnect is so, so important, especially, like, in this day and age when I can do all my work on this little phone device, um, in fact, when my power was out in the early days of the LA fires in January, I was doing my job on my phone. Um, but that's not a help, and there was necessity to that, but, like, when things are normal and status quo, like, I don't wanna be on my phone all the time. And I think we all, no matter how busy you think your job is, you have to find that space. And if it means getting out there and running and forcing yourself to be in a situation where you can't do it, then do it.
You just have to do it. You don't have a choice.
Someone once said to me, like when I was like, "Well, if I go on vacation, I'm gonna come back and have a ton of stuff to do." And well, so what? That
Yeah.
was you. But
Yeah, no, I know I have learned the lesson. So when we lived in Europe or I lived in Sweden, I took more
Mhm,
vacation. Moved to US, it was kind of looked down upon to take vacation. I remember coming over
mhm,
here and I was like, "I'm gonna go off for a month." And my manager at the time was like, "What? What are you talking about? Like,
mhm,
you're in US now. It doesn't work this way." But I think you're dropping a lot of goals and a lot of tips and tricks, Steph. And one thing I want to highlight that I have seen on your journey, and it is a recurring theme throughout the book, and that is small micro action. You got to start somewhere and you got to start just you are worthy, you are brilliant, you have all the
mhm.
information, all the things you need to do. Just do something. And by doing something, you build up more and more and more self worth. And several people have also said that you have a quick hack. Go see a therapist, go see a
Mhm.
psychologist, like work through what are your coping mechanisms, often from a childhood or a young age, and then rephrase them as your muscles instead of as your scars, basically.
Yeah, and ultimately, those actions not only make you feel better and more well-adjusted, but it makes you a better leader because 'cause you're able to be more present for people.
A thousand
Mhm.
percent. 1,000%. Okay, let's go into rapid fire questions. This is just first thing that
Uh-huh.
comes to your mind. It is what it is. No cuts, no redos. Are you ready? What's one belief you have retired?
I think we already talked about it, that I have to save everyone.
I love it. What's a rule you had to break to improve outcomes?
I think it's that rule that, like, you have to be accessible at all times.
You don't.
No.
You
I
really
found that
don't.
out, and it was actually very good. Now I'm an evangelist for it.
As we were writing the book, obviously we went back and forth on a lot of
Uh-huh.
titles. There was a lot of other discussions. Now the book is the final and done. It's Power Without Permission. What does power without permission mean for you?
Um, I think for me, it's really about finding different ways to lead. I've actually been thinking a lot about this. that the traditional models of leadership are very masculine focused. And Marlene, who is one of my colleagues here, who's written a chapter in the book, and I know you're going to do a podcast with her. When I first started here, and the leadership team here at the Skirball is predominantly female, and she says to me, and this is why I love Marlene from the beginning. I always keep asking, like, are we too patriarchal in our leadership style? And I was just like, oh my God, you're speaking my language. But I think it means that, like, we can find different ways to lead based on who we are, you know, regardless of race or gender or sexuality or national origin. And that's what makes it cool that there's not one way to lead organizations. And we're all socialized differently. I don't think there's anything that makes it like, oh, because you were born a man, you lead this way. It's like the ways that we were socialized in this world, and we bring those different things. And for the longest time, like I've heard this conversation with two women soccer players I really like. They were talking about the difference between the men's game and the women's game is like the men's game was held as the standard, but the reality is they're kind of two different games for different reasons, and that's okay. Like that's what makes it cool. Is like almost you're watching two different sports, and I think to me, like you can have that power without that permission of like, no, you have to lead this one way. That's it.
I love your definition, and I write some of this in my chapter of the book. Being brought up by a very strong mother, only being surrounded more or less by very strong, authoritative
Mhm.
women. Growing up, my belief system and how I sort of don't see leadership as one or the other. I don't equate authority to just a man thing. I
Mhm.
equate it to actually, honestly, more to a woman.
Mhm.
But it is so important that, and this is what we highlight in the book, it is you already have the power. You already
Mhm.
are brilliant. You don't need anyone's permission. You can just do. So I love the fact that you summarized
Mhm.
it that way, Steph. What's one micro ritual that you do before a hard conversation?
I often with being in a job where I have an office where I can close my door, sometimes I'll close my door and just take a minute. I have one wall that you can't see on the camera right now is all like just this view of the outside, our garden area and whatnot. Sometimes a cool, like, little interesting bird will fly up or whatnot, and just, like, taking that moment to center myself, and often and our CEO said this recently about, difficult conversations, that when you enter into that, if I'm giving somebody bad news, I have to sit there and take a moment and go, "This is gonna be harder on them," and that allows me to kinda detach myself a little bit and to give them the space to have their reaction, like, it's not about me.
I
Yeah, and
love that.
sometimes it's just a minute where I take that, like, moment to kinda just take a breath.
I
Mhm,
absolutely love that. It's harder for them than it
mhm.
is for you. If you don't adapt, you
Mm. I mean, go crazy. And not good, crazy.
tell me more.
Um, I think, like, when I got stuck in my one way of doing things and didn't adapt to build healthy habits, I was spiraling downward into this puddle of exhaustion and, I almost like I was gonna just dissolve into a puddle because I no longer existed. All that existed was me as the savior.
Adapt is you reason why we named the podcast Adapt
Yeah.
or Die. Stephanie, is there anything else that you want the listeners to know about your chapter or things we have talked about in the process of writing this book?
No, I just think it's a reminder of how important it is to put all of our stories in conversation with each other. I'm just coming off this trip to Minneapolis where I spent a few days with 9 of my colleagues in the museum field that are in different leadership roles within museums, and, like, realizing how valuable that network of people is to kind of hold you in check as well, and those are people that I sometimes reach out to and just say, "Hey, this is what I'm struggling with," and sometimes they'll have to be like, "Snap out of it." But have those people around you. They don't have to be mentors. They can just be peers that I think that's been important to me. And the people that are outside of my organization. I think, at Hercules, one thing we got so insulated, and part of that was we were all just isolated from the pandemic that became our
Mhm.
world. And I forgot like how important that network is outside because they end up being people that they care about you, but they're not directly invested in your immediate drama.
Which means they will also tell you straight to your
Yeah.
face when you
Yeah.
if it needs to be
Yeah,
done.
and we've done that for each other. We all called each other on those small things during this time as well, and it's causes us to form a really tight bond.
I love that you said that. It's also another recurring theme of the book. Like it is who you surround yourself with, basically. I love
Mhm,
it, Steph.
mhm. Yeah, if anybody's in Los Angeles, stop by the Skirball Cultural Center. Everybody knows the Getty Center, which is 3 miles down the road from us. We're small but mighty Jewish cultural center and have awesome rotating exhibitions. Right now, we have an exhibition of Jack Kirby's work. So if you love superheroes, he created Black Panther, Captain America. We have a Black Panther costume in the exhibition. So definitely stop by. Everybody who here will be willing to welcome you. Also encourage people to check out womenprisoners.org, which is the website for the organization I volunteer with. Sign up for the newsletter, donate, and if you want to get involved, and I'm on LinkedIn, I'm easy to find with my weird last name, and send me a message. Happy to connect. Really, like, especially with HR professionals who are trying to find ways to kind of take care of themselves, but also take care of their teams.
Thank you so much
Mhm,
for all the work you did for the book, our conversations, and also coming on this
mhm.
podcast, Stephanie.
Yeah.
For anyone else out there who thought that this episode was interesting, please help support the podcast by going to Apple Podcast and leaving a 5-star review on there. You will help another person find the podcast and maybe pick up some of the tools on how you set boundaries and how you learn to say no. Um, until next time, please remember, if we don't adapt, we won't thrive and we won't survive. Have an amazing time. Thank you.